Imagine seeing the very last member of a species, knowing that once it's gone, that entire line of life disappears forever. No more footsteps, no more calls in the wild, no more future generations. Just silence. What makes it even more haunting is that in some cases, someone actually captured the final moments on camera. A single photograph that silently tells the story of extinction. Today, we're looking at 5 chilling last photos of extinct animals ever taken. These images aren't just pictures, they are the final proof that these animals once walked the earth, and that humans were there when their stories ended. Let's begin. The first chilling photo belongs to the Tasmanian tiger, also known as the Thylacine. At first glance, the animal looks like a strange mix between a wolf and a tiger. It had a dog-like body, stiff tail, and dark stripes across its back. But despite its appearance, it wasn't a wolf at all. It was actually a marsupial, more closely related to kangaroos. The last known thylacine was kept in captivity at the Hobart Zoo in Tasmania. In 1933, a short video and several photos were taken of this animal pacing inside a small cage. If you've ever seen the footage, it's difficult to watch without feeling a little uneasy. The animal walks back and forth, occasionally opening its mouth in a wide yawn. At the time, nobody realized how important those images would become. Just 3 years later, in 1936, the last thylacine died after being accidentally locked outside its shelter during a cold night. With its death, the species officially went extinct. That footage from 1933 became one of the last visual records of the species alive. Today, it's often shared online, and every time people watch it, the same thought comes to mind. We were so close to saving it, but we didn't. Moving on to the second haunting image, we have Martha, the last passenger pigeon. Believe it or not, passenger pigeons were once the most abundant birds in North America. Flocks were so large that people said they could block out the sun as they passed overhead. There were billions of them. But in the 1800s, things changed quickly. Large-scale hunting and massive deforestation destroyed their habitat. The birds were hunted for cheap meat, and their numbers collapsed incredibly fast. By the early 1900s, they had nearly disappeared. The final survivor was a female pigeon named Martha. She lived alone at the Cincinnati Zoo. There is a famous photograph taken in 1912 that shows Martha perched quietly inside her enclosure. It's just a simple image of a bird sitting on a branch. But when you realize what it represents, it becomes heartbreaking. Martha wasn't just another bird in a zoo. She was the last passenger pigeon on Earth. In 1914, Martha died at the age of 29. Once she was gone, a species that once numbered in the billions vanished forever. Her body was preserved and is now displayed at the Smithsonian Museum as a reminder of one of the most dramatic extinctions caused by humans. Next on our list is a photo that many people have never heard of, the last known Heath hen, nicknamed Booming Ben. The Heath hen was a type of prairie chicken that once lived across the eastern United States. But heavy hunting and habitat destruction wiped out most of the population by the late 1800s. Eventually, only a small group remained on Martha's Vineyard, an island off the coast of Massachusetts. Conservationists tried to protect them, but disaster kept striking. Fires, disease, and predators reduced their numbers again and again. By the early 1930s, only one bird remained. Locals named him Booming Ben because of the booming sound male birds made during mating displays. Imagine that for a moment. A species that once lived across an entire region, reduced to just one lonely bird calling out into the wilderness with no one left to answer. There is a photograph taken of Booming Ben while scientists observed him in the wild. In the image, he looks like any other bird, calm, standing still. But that photo captured the final chapter of the species. The last confirmed sighting of Booming Ben was on March 11th, 1932. After that day, he was never seen again. With his disappearance, the Heath hen officially became extinct. Now, let's talk about one of the most unusual animals ever photographed. The quagga. The quagga looked like a zebra that had been cut in half. The front half of its body had the familiar zebra stripes, but the back half was mostly plain brown. This strange animal once lived in South Africa. Unfortunately, European settlers hunted quaggas heavily during the 1800s because they were seen as competition for livestock. One of the most famous images of the quagga was taken in the 1870s at the London Zoo. The photograph shows a single quagga standing calmly behind a fence. At the time, photography was still new, so very few animals had ever been captured on camera. Nobody realized they were photographing something that would soon disappear forever. Just a few years later, in 1883, the last known quagga died in that same zoo. That photo from the 1870s is believed to be the only photograph ever taken of a living quagga. Every other image of the animal comes from drawings, paintings, or preserved specimens. It's eerie to think that one of the only real photos of this animal also happens to be one of the last times it was ever seen alive. Finally, we have a much more recent story, the case of Lonesome George. George was a giant tortoise that lived in the Galapagos Islands. More specifically, he belonged to the Pinta Island tortoise species. By the time scientists discovered him in 1971, George was already believed to be the last of his kind. They searched the island for years, hoping to find another tortoise from the same species. But they never did. George became a global symbol of conservation. Photos of him were taken many times during his life. In many of those images, he stands quietly in the sunlight, surrounded by researchers and visitors. Despite many attempts, George never successfully reproduced with other tortoises. Then in 2012, George was found dead in his enclosure. With his death, the Pinta Island tortoise species officially disappeared. The photos taken during his lifetime became the final visual record of a species that had survived for thousands of years before disappearing in a single human lifetime. When you look at those pictures today, it's strange to think that the animal in the frame represents an entire species and that there will never be another one. What makes all of these photos so powerful isn't just the animals themselves. It's the realization that the people taking the pictures often had no idea what they were documenting. A simple zoo photo, a wildlife snapshot, a scientist observing a bird, in that moment, it just seemed ordinary. But years later, those images turned into something else entirely. They became the final evidence that these animals once existed. Today, scientists use these stories as reminders of how fragile wildlife can be. Many species alive today are facing similar threats: habitat loss, climate change, and human expansion. The difference is that now we have the knowledge and the technology to protect them. Those haunting last photos should serve as a warning from history, because once the last photo is taken, there are no second chances. But the most haunting part about these photos isn't just the animals, it's what they tell us about the future. And if you think about it, that's what makes these photos so chilling. They look completely normal at first. An animal standing in a zoo enclosure, a bird sitting on a branch, a creature walking slowly across the ground. Nothing about the moment seems dramatic or historic. But what we know now completely changes how we see those images. Those animals were standing at the very edge of extinction. And take a second and imagine the weight of that. The last thylacine pacing in its cage, the final passenger pigeon sitting alone, booming Ben calling into empty forests, the quagga standing quietly behind a fence, and Lonesome George living out his final years while scientists desperately searched for another like him. Each of them represents a moment when a species reached its final chapter. No more wild populations, no more future generations, just one last life, and then silence. What's even more haunting is that extinction doesn't always happen in some distant past. It has happened in the age of photography, video, and modern science, which means we can actually see the final moments frozen in time. But maybe these images serve another purpose. Maybe they remind us that the story isn't over for the species that still remain. Because the animals alive today don't have to become the next last photo in history.